Hi, this is Tom Clendon, your SBR online lecturer, and I've been asked to talk about smart answering of questions, tips to approach the exam, the SBR exam. And I thought I'd break this down into 5 areas. First of all, I think it's always important to read the requirement first, because only by reading the requirement can you then read the question knowing what you've got to do, and only by reading the requirement and then reading the question are you then able to answer the question. So reading the requirement is really key, and I think a lot of the time you've got to try and break down that requirement to see what is really being asked. And often there's a key word of "and", because often you're being asked more than one question. So for example, why and how is deferred tax accounted for? Is two questions. Why is deferred tax accounted for, which is to do with the matching, and how is deferred tax accounted for, which is more to do with temporary differences. So understanding what you're being asked, breaking down the requirement, to discuss the accounting and ethical implications is two separate things, and explaining how goodwill should have been calculated, and to show the correcting journals and to show the correcting entries is asking you in the same requirement to have a split of words and numbers. And I would tend to favour doing the words first generally. So you're explaining what you're doing and then you're using the numbers to illustrate that. And typically most of the marks or more of the marks in the split are going to be available for the words rather than the numbers. Some students tend to obsess on the numbers and not write anything, and that's always going to be a struggle if you're going to pass on that area. Now, I did say there briefly about correcting entries, and I actually mentioned journals, didn't I? Specifically, I've not yet seen an SBR exam question that refers to please do a journal. What's the debit and credit? I've seen it in the answers, and even my own answers will sometimes get involved in articulating a debit and a credit because it's such a useful shorthand. But if you're not comfortable with debits and credits and you're asked to show a correction, you can easily just put it as a plus plus or a plus minus. Yeah, so just say, the asset goes up. When we revalue, the asset goes up and so does the revaluation reserve, something like that. And you could put plus asset plus revaluation reserve. Secondly, I want to talk about time management. I mean, this is basic stuff, but it's so important because time is a real pressure, is a real limiting factor in this exam. So it's really important that you tailor the length of your answers to the number of marks available. It's a 3-hour and 15-minute exam. And in my budgeting, I tend to disregard the 15 minutes. I think of that as kind of safety net. Don't spend the first 15 minutes reading the exam. No, just get on with it, all right? Just get on with it and tailor the length of your answer. So if it's 10 marks, it's 18 minutes. If it's 5 marks, it's 9 minutes. You've got to know that. And you tailor the length of your answer to the time allowed and the number of marks. So if it's a 4-mark thing, I would expect you to write 4 things. Yeah, and to separate out ideally your answer into 4 mini paragraphs, so there's white space between each point. And typically in an accounting standard question, you can start with a soft definition. Now, when I say a soft definition, don't regurgitate word for word the exact definition. You're not being tested on Google, your ability to be Google. Incorporate the name of the company, soften it, relate it to what's going on. That'll be probably worth a mark. And then use the information in the question, discuss and apply, before finally reaching some kind of conclusion. Yes, it's an impairment, or yes, it's held for sale, or, you know, no, it's an associate rather than a sub, whatever the question is about. Thirdly, increasingly everybody is doing computer-based exams. And there's a little bit of smartness around how you manipulate the system. So, for example, it's very good practice to copy the requirements straight away into your word response area. So you've got the requirement there in front of you as you're answering the question. It keeps the eyes on the prize. Yeah. Personally, I'm not a fan of the scratch pad. It's never marked, it's never seen by the examiner. And if you want to play around with things, play around with it in your word response area. You can always delete it if you don't want to. And there's that classic awareness issue around the relationship between the exhibits and the requirements. You need to own this. You need to get this. But if you're doing CBE, or you're doing even if you're doing the paper exam, look at the requirements of the question, and you'll find that the requirements of part A will tend to relate to exhibit 1. And the requirement of part B will tend to relate to exhibit 2. And so you don't actually have to absorb all the information in the question to be able to answer part A. You don't need to read exhibit 4 to answer part A. So, the question is broken down, and you've got to be aware of that. Otherwise it's a very time-consuming exercise, reading everything. Fourth thing I've got down here is strategy. Do your best question first, please. Every question is compulsory in SBR, but let's start on the front foot. Let's not concede an early goal. Let's, after 45 minutes, an hour, feel good about the exam, not be under additional pressure of being behind. Now, for many of you, your best question might be groups. Or for some of you, it might be the ethics question. I don't know. You're all individuals. But in the exam, be prepared to be a little bit flexible. I mean, in the September 20 exam, there was a big cash flow, a number crunching cash flow. And a number of students that I've spoken to blamed that initial question as putting them off, and blame that on them not passing that particular exam. And look, it's difficult to judge and it's difficult to generalize, but why start with something that is difficult for you? Because it is going to put your back up. It is going to erode your confidence. So you do want to start with something nice, something that you're confident with, that you build up to. And reflect on the strategy. I mean, what I get my students to do is 3 mock exams, a mock on the tuition, a mock on the revision, a final mock, and they're getting feedback on that. And so they're developing their own strategies. So reflect on the process of doing your mocks, what you did well, what you didn't do so well, how you're going to improve it. Nobody ever gets 100%. Nobody ever does a perfect exam. But the more mocks you do, and as you prepare for the exam, you're building in your confidence. That's the idea. And finally, let me think about the build-up. Let me think about, the day before the exam, how you prepare yourself in that sense, how you are smart in that sense. If you're a boxer and you're training for a fight, what do you think a boxer does the night before a fight? Go on a big training run, work really hard? No. I think that boxer has put the hard work in, and I think that what that boxer is doing is going to bed early, relaxing, thinking through their strategy of the fight, reminding themselves of the basics. And I think that's what you've got to do. At some stage in the build up to the exam, you've got to relax, you've got to switch down, And you've got to focus on the key things, making sure that you are familiar with the functionality of the CPE, particularly if you're doing a remote exam, particularly if you are doing a remote invigilated exam at home. It's really important that you fully understand the processes involved, that the curtains are drawn, and that you've got a clear desk and you've got the right computer with the right level of stuff. And that would be very important to get set up. And I think in the immediate build up to the exam, remember that you will pass or fail this exam on the basics, not on the ultimate fancy point. And if you're in the exam and you come across something that you don't know, well, that's always the case. Every student doing an SBR exam always comes across something that they haven't quite understood, something that they haven't read about. But that little thing is not going to be the difference between you pass and failing. You are going to have a go at it, you're going to have a guess at it, you're going to work around it, you're not going to obsess about it. But if you come across something in the exam that you know you've studied, but you can't remember it, that's when it begins to freak you out. So it's important that you relax, it's important that you revise your revision so you can recall what you have learnt. The limiting factor about passing SBR for most students is going to be the lack of time. Yeah, you have a go at the answer. You answer every part of the question. Even if you're not 100% sure that you're right, you have a go. Even if you're 80%, 60%, there's no negative marking. There's no negative marking. If you write nothing, I guarantee you will get no marks. But if you have an attempt, yeah, then that can be thought of, and even if it's not in the exact model answer, it's expert marked. And if it's relevant, if it's answering the question, then the marker should give you something for your attempt. Good luck. Good luck. But yeah, remember what Viv Richards said. He was accused of being lucky, and he said, well, do you know what? I find that the more I practice, the luckier I get. I hope you've worked hard. I've hoped you've practiced hard. I hope you pass this examination. Check me out on LinkedIn. There's lots of articles there. There's lots of tips and things that I publish regularly on LinkedIn. And thank you very much for listening.